Imagine waking up one day and boom, your city's in a completely different country. Everything's changed, like your home, your neighbors, your whole life, really.
It's mind-boggling, isn't it?
Totally. And that was the reality for millions during the partition of India in 1947.
A truly massive event. We often hear about it as this, triumph of independence, but it was also a time of unbelievable upheaval and suffering.
Yeah, the end of British rule definitely brought celebration, but it also unleashed so much chaos and violence as the subcontinent split into India and Pakistan.
Exactly. And to think this monumental event was actually shaped by an election where only a tiny sliver of the population could even vote.
It's crazy, right? Yasmin Khan's book, The Great Partition, The Making of India and Pakistan, really digs into this.
Oh, it's a fantastic resource.
Absolutely. It reveals that the 1946 elections, which were, crucial to how partition played out, were incredibly limited.
You can imagine the pressure cooker of anxieties brewing when such a huge population is excluded from having a say. And this, of course, on top of the pre-existing tensions between religious communities, created a volatile atmosphere.
It's like a powder keg waiting to explode. And the book really paints a vivid picture of these rising tensions.
Oh, absolutely.
Khan details the growth of militant groups like the RSS, the politically charged campaigns, full of religious rhetoric, and the increasing frequency of riots.
It's a recipe for disaster. And it's crucial to remember that while the Hindu-Muslim conflict is often highlighted, partition affected other groups as well.
Right, groups whose stories we don't always hear.
Exactly. The Sikhs, for instance, they faced immense challenges and displacement. Khan does a great job bringing those stories to light.
It adds another layer of complexity to an already intricate situation.
For sure. And as we dig into the political landscape of that time, we encounter these towering figures, Gandhi, Nehru, and Jinnah, each with their own vision for the future of India.
Different visions, too.
Right. And these contrasting visions, combined with the British government's hasty withdrawal, well, it just fueled the chaotic fire of partition.
It's fascinating how their paths intertwined at such a pivotal moment. Gandhi, the champion of non-violence and unity, found himself at odds with the rising tide of communalism.
Must have been incredibly frustrating for him to see his ideals clashing with the realities unfolding on the ground.
Absolutely. Then you have Nehru, focused on building a modern secular state, trying to reconcile his vision with the growing demand for a separate Muslim nation.
A tough position to be in.
And on the other side, you have Jinnah, this shrewd political player who saw the creation of Pakistan as the only way to protect Muslim interests.
It's like a historical drama, isn't it? These personalities and their viewpoints converging during such a pivotal moment.
It is. And it's in Khan's book that we really get a sense of how these political decisions impacted everyday people.
Because it's one thing to discuss political theories and strategies, but it's quite another to understand how those decisions ripple through the lives of ordinary individuals.
Exactly. And Khan uses these vivid descriptions and stories to paint a picture of life during that tumultuous period.
It makes it feel so real, so relatable. Like she describes the fear and uncertainty as the borders remained undefined until the very last minute.
Imagine that, not knowing whether you'd be in India or Pakistan when you woke up.
Let alone what that would mean for your future.
The chaos must have been unimaginable. People scrambling for resources, basic services collapsing, cities descending into anarchy.
And people forced to flee their homes, often with nothing but the clothes on their backs.
It's a chilling reminder of how quickly things can unravel. And to make matters worse, this is before instant communication.
Right. The lack of reliable information and the rapid spread of rumors just amplified the fear and violence.
Like imagine hearing whispers about poisoned wells or attacks on refugee convoys, not knowing what to believe.
Terrifying.
It really highlights how misinformation can escalate a situation, especially when people are already on edge. Khan gives this chilling example from Simla, where a rumor about a poisoned water supply sent the entire city into a frenzy.
People were desperate for any scrap of news about their loved ones, relying on unreliable sources, word of mouth, anything that they could get.
Adding to the confusion and anxiety.
Exactly.
And amidst all this chaos, certain groups, like women, faced even more daunting challenges.
Khan bravely addresses this often overlooked aspect of partition, detailing the horrific trials women endured.
It's a crucial part of the story that can't be ignored.
Absolutely. We need to understand the widespread abduction and sexual violence that occurred, the social stigma placed on survivors, and the forced repatriation efforts that often ignored the needs and desires of the women themselves.
It's a reminder that even in the midst of these large-scale historical events, it's the individual stories, the human experiences that truly capture the impact.
Couldn't agree more. And as we dive further into Khan's account, we'll see how these individual experiences weave together to create a richer, more nuanced understanding of partition's lasting legacy. And as things escalated, the responsibility of actually dividing the land, like physically drawing the boundaries, fell to this guy, Sir Cyril Radcliffe, a British lawyer who, get this, had never even been to India.
Wait, hold on. They handed the fate of millions to someone who never set foot in the country. That's unbelievable.
Yeah, it's a wild detail that Khan highlights in her book. The British claimed his lack of familiarity would make him impartial, but in reality, it was a decision that backfired spectacularly. Radcliffe was given a measly 5 weeks to determine the boundary, working with limited information and facing immense pressure from both sides.
5 weeks to split a subcontinent. That's insane. No wonder things went so wrong.
Exactly, and it gets worse. His instructions were incredibly vague. He was supposed to consider not just religious demographics, but also these other factors like economic and geographic considerations. It's like asking someone to bake a cake without telling them what ingredients to use.
So basically, they set him up for failure. What happened? How did this rust process actually play out?
Well, the result was the Radcliffe Line, a boundary that was announced just 2 days before independence. Can you imagine?
Oh, the panic.
Millions were left in shock, realizing they were suddenly on the wrong side of a hastily drawn line.
It must have been pure chaos.
Absolute chaos. People were literally running for their lives, trying to reach areas where their religion was the majority before violence erupted.
And the violence, it was unavoidable, wasn't it?
Sadly, no. Khan doesn't shy away from depicting the brutality. Massacres, forced conversions, mass abductions, sexual violence. The scale of it is hard to grasp.
It's a stark reminder of how quickly things can descend into barbarity. And what's even more disturbing, Khan points out that even the institutions meant to maintain order, the police, the army, they were often complicit in the violence.
Exactly. She documents instances where the police either just stood by as the violence unfolded or even actively participated in attacks against minorities. There's this one particularly harrowing account of trucks piled high with bodies. It speaks to the dehumanization that took place.
It's like all sense of morality vanished. And was the violence confined to Punjab and Bengal, or did it spread?
Unfortunately, it spread like wildfire. It reached other cities, Delhi, Lucknow, Amritsar. It shows how interconnected these communities were and how quickly violence can escalate, fueled by rumors, fear, and a thirst for revenge.
So it wasn't just a Hindu-Muslim conflict then?
Right. It's crucial to remember that. Khan emphasizes that Sikhs were also targeted and displaced. This was a multifaceted conflict with countless victims.
It's a complex and heartbreaking story that requires looking beyond simplistic narratives. In the middle of all this chaos, were there any efforts to help those in need?
There were. Khan highlights the work of groups like the Red Cross and Arya Samaj, who provided medical care, food, shelter to refugees. It's a testament to the human spirit, how even in the darkest of times, compassion and a desire to help others can shine through.
It's a reminder that there's always hope, even amidst such horrific events. What about the long-term effects of partition? How did it impact the lives of those who survived?
Well, the impact was immense. Imagine the disruption of social norms, economic instability, the profound sense of uncertainty that gripped the region. One of the most immediate consequences was the disruption of food supplies. The mass displacement, the breakdown of transportation, all led to widespread shortages and skyrocketing prices.
On top of everything else, people were facing hunger and starvation.
Absolutely. Khan describes how rationing became the norm, with people enduring long queues for basic necessities. And of course, black markets thrived, selling goods at exorbitant prices.
It's just tragic, the added hardship on people already dealing with the trauma of displacement and violence.
Khan even talks about how the simple act of buying cloth could become a flashpoint for conflict. In a climate of tension and distrust, even the most mundane transactions could escalate into violence.
Wow.
She recounts this incident in Delhi where a disagreement over the price of cloth in a marketplace turned into a full-blown riot, resulting in deaths and widespread destruction.
It really highlights how deeply the impact of such an event seeps into every aspect of daily life. What about the women? How did their experiences differ from the men's?
Khan dedicates a significant portion of her book to the unique and often devastating challenges faced by women. She talks about the horrific violence they endured, the mass abductions, the rapes, the forced conversions.
It's a reminder that women are often the most vulnerable during these times of conflict.
Right, and Khan explains how women were seen as symbols of community honor, their bodies becoming battlegrounds in this larger conflict. It's heartbreaking.
Truly heartbreaking.
She shares this story of a woman who was abducted and repeatedly raped, only to be ostracized and shamed by her own community when she returned. It's a terrible example of how women were victimized on multiple levels, first by the perpetrators and then by the very societal structures that failed to protect them.
It's a painful reminder that the trauma extends far beyond the immediate wounds. And what about the families that were separated? Did they ever reunite?
Well, Khan delves into those desperate efforts to locate loved ones lost in the chaos. It's a poignant picture she paints. The overcrowded train stations, the frantic searches, the agonizing wait for news, and the crushing reality that many families would never be whole again.
It's hard to even fathom the emotional toll of that kind of uncertainty. To be separated from your loved ones, not knowing their fate, must have been unbearable.
She tells this particularly poignant story of a woman desperately trying to reach her husband by phone, only to be met with nationalist slogans and insults from the operators.
That's just cruel. Even in their role as communication facilitators, they were caught up in the division.
It really speaks to how deep the animosity ran, how even seemingly neutral spaces became battlegrounds for ideological conflict. And sadly, that woman's experience wasn't unique. Countless families were torn apart, their lives forever altered.
So amidst all this loss and suffering, did anything positive come out of partition?
Despite the immense challenges, both India and Pakistan eventually showed remarkable resilience, rebuilding their nations and resettling millions of refugees.
I can't imagine the scale of that task.
It was a monumental undertaking. But Khan highlights the efforts of individuals and organizations who worked tirelessly to provide aid, showing that even in the darkest times, the human spirit can endure.
It's those stories of compassion and courage that give us hope.
One thing that really stood out, as we talked about the aftermath, is just how deeply partition impacted everyday life.
Yeah, it's easy to focus on the big political shifts, but it's those everyday experiences that really bring it home.
Absolutely. Think about the partition of Punjab. It wasn't just a line on a map.
Right, it was splitting a vital economic hub.
Exactly. Khan talks about how it disrupted trade networks, the loss of skilled labor,
leading to food shortages, economic hardship.
For years to come. Even those who escaped the violence were still hit hard.
It's like the ripple effects just kept spreading.
They did. And then there's the impact on women, which Khan also explores in depth.
A really important part of the story, often overlooked.
Absolutely. She doesn't shy away from discussing the violence they faced. Abductions, rapes, forced conversions.
It's a tragic reminder of how vulnerable women are during times of conflict.
And what makes Khan's work so powerful is that she connects those individual experiences to the wider social context.
How so?
Well, she explains how women were seen as symbols of community honor, their bodies becoming tragically battlegrounds in this larger conflict.
That's just heartbreaking.
It is. It shows how the trauma of partition went beyond physical wounds, leaving deep psychological scars.
Definitely.
There's this one story she shares, a woman who was abducted and repeatedly raped. And then, upon her return, she was ostracized, shamed by her own community. Unbelievable. It's awful. It highlights the long-lasting, often hidden consequences of trauma, how the wounds of partition lingered long after the violence itself ended.
What about the families separated during that chaos? Were there any reunions?
Khan talks about that too, the agonizing search for lost loved ones. She paints this picture of overcrowded train stations, people frantically searching, the endless wait for news.
And for many, the realization that their families would never be whole again.
It's tough to read. It shows the enduring power of love and family ties, how people clung to hope in the face of such adversity.
Definitely.
There's this one account, a woman trying desperately to reach her husband by phone. She's met with nationalist slogans, vitriol from the telephone operators.
Wow, that's just cruel.
It is. It shows how the conflict permeated everything. Even those basic acts of communication were twisted by it.
So, amidst all this suffering, did anything positive come out of partition?
Well, it's impossible to downplay the tragedy, but both India and Pakistan eventually displayed remarkable resilience. They started the incredibly difficult process of rebuilding, resettling millions of refugees.
I can't imagine undertaking something like that.
It was a monumental task. Khan highlights the efforts of individuals, organizations working tirelessly to provide aid. It shows that even in the darkest of times, the human spirit can endure.
It's those stories of compassion and courage that offer a glimmer of hope. So how did partition shape the identities of those two new nations?
That's fascinating. India, under Nehru, chose a secular, inclusive approach, emphasizing unity in diversity.
Makes sense given India's multitude of religions, languages, cultures.
Exactly. Nehru envisioned a modern, progressive India, embracing science and industry while still honoring its heritage.
But achieving that vision must have been tough, given the mistrust and trauma.
It was. Khan discusses the ongoing tensions between Hindus and Muslims, the rise of Hindu nationalist groups, the difficulties of integrating those millions of refugees.
Shows that building a truly unified society takes time, especially after such a divisive event. What about Pakistan? What path did they take?
Pakistan, under Jinnah, defined itself as an Islamic republic. The idea was to create a homeland where Muslims could live according to their own laws and values.
But basing a nation on religious identity, that raises questions about minority rights.
Absolutely. Khan examines those complexities, the challenges Pakistan faced in balancing its Islamic identity with its commitment to minority rights for Hindus and Sikhs.
Tough balance to strike.
It is. While the government implemented policies for interfaith harmony, integrating minorities, the shadow of partition remained, an ongoing struggle.
So both nations had their own unique challenges in shaping their identities and fostering unity. And what about the relationship between them? Did partition affect that?
Sadly, it did, and its legacy continues to impact their relationship to this day.
In what way?
Well, there are unresolved territorial disputes, historical grievances, a lot of mutual suspicion. It's led to multiple wars, a persistent tension that makes cooperation and development difficult.
A stark reminder that the wounds of the past can have very long-lasting consequences. And what about those who were displaced, forced to build new lives elsewhere?
Khan explores their experiences too, this vast diaspora scattered across the globe carrying memories of their homeland, the trauma of displacement.
And did they find any sense of belonging?
Interestingly, yes. That shared experience, regardless of religion or culture, forged a unique identity among them.
So it wasn't about where they came from, but what they'd been through.
Exactly. They were united by that yearning for a home they could no longer return to. Khan shares their stories as they settled in new places. Punjabi refugees in Delhi, Bengalis in Calcutta, Sindhis in Bombay.
Adapting to new languages, customs, that must have been incredibly challenging.
It was. There was hardship, discrimination. They faced difficulties finding work, housing, education. But Khan also highlights their resilience, their adaptability. They brought their skills, traditions, stories, enriching the places they settled.
So even in the loss, there was a sense of rebirth, of creating new communities.
Yes, and some even adopted a more global outlook, connecting with other diaspora communities, challenging those traditional boundaries of national identity.
So in the face of displacement, they found ways to connect, to create meaning. How does Khan conclude her exploration of this monumental event?
Well, her book doesn't shy away from the tragic consequences, but there's also a glimmer of hope. It's a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, highlighting those acts of compassion, courage, the tireless work toward reconciliation and peace.
A reminder that even amidst immense suffering, the potential for healing and hope remains.
Definitely. Yasmin Khan's The Great Partition is a must-read for understanding this pivotal moment. It's meticulously researched, deeply moving. It challenges simplistic narratives, confronts uncomfortable truths, and reminds us of the enduring human cost of political decisions.
It's a story of loss and resilience, of violence and compassion, of division and the hope for reconciliation. A story that still holds relevance in our world today. This deep dive has given us a lot to think about, and I encourage everyone to explore this complex and important topic further.
I agree. Khan's book is a great starting point. There are so many resources available: memoirs, films, documentaries, academic works, even artistic expressions exploring the many facets of this historical event. It deserves our attention, our continued exploration. It offers a powerful lens into the human condition in all its complexity.